Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Thursday edition of Point of View, and we are going to be talking about a lot of different topics. Really loaded up today. Every half hour we'll be talking about something different. But I wanted to start off with a movie that I've been talking about, and one that I hope that you will go to see, and that is The Most Reluctant Convert, The Untold Story of C.S. Lewis. Individual, of course, who is a professor at Oxford, later at Cambridge, might arguably be considered the most important Christian writer in the 20th century. And of course, in the past, we've talked about some of the great material done by Fellowship for Performing Arts, but you now have a chance to go into a theater to watch that. And I would encourage you to go, to bring with you a number of friends, maybe in your Sunday school class, maybe even some skeptics, because I think it is going to be just a great opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about C.S. Lewis and to use that to encourage you, but maybe even challenge some of your skeptical friends. To help us understand a little bit more about what is in the film, we bring back to the microphone Max McLean, who is, of course, an award-winning actor, as well as the founder of the Fellowship for Performing Arts. You perhaps know him from a number of things that he's done over the years: the Screw Tape Letters, The Great Divorce, of course, the onstage production of The Untold Story of C.S. Lewis. As many times people listen to him thinking, I've heard that voice before. Well, he's also, of course, the narrator of the Listener's Bible. Welcome back to Point of View, Max McLean.
Thank you, Kerby. I enjoyed your introduction very much.
Well, I guess we should stop there, but no, we want to get started. And we have a lot of information. First of all, if you would like to know more about the Fellowship for Performing Arts, that's next to his picture. Then if you scroll down, we have one where you can find out where to get the tickets to attend this. And in our locale, we can either go to it Wednesday, November 3rd, Thursday, November 4th, Sunday, November 7th. And they've even said if there's a real interest, it might expand to that. I recognize we broadcast to more than 36 different states, so you'll have to type in your zip code to find it. And of course, you can also find that at cslewis.move or cslewismovie.com. We also have the trailer. But if nothing else, what you've done, Max, is taken what has been a very successful on-stage production and put it on the big screen with you and other actors and really tell the story of C.S. Lewis.
Right. We've expanded it from a one-person play, which has been in Dallas, Fort Worth area a couple of times. And went to Oxford, England during COVID in the fall of 2020, and expanded the play into a film with on about 20 locations, 15 actors, 190 extras, 240 costumes, to tell the story of this reluctant convert who went from vigorous debunker of Christianity in his teens and early 20s to believing in God's, in a hypothetical sense, like God of the philosophers, to believing in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who was in the burning bush, the God of Moses. But he said he could not figure out the significance of Jesus. He said, the God to whom I surrendered was not human. I had no belief in the incarnation at all. To finally, very, very reluctantly giving in to Jesus Christ.
I might just mention the trailer is about 2 minutes long. First of all, your assignment is to take that trailer, put it on your Facebook page, your Twitter feed, whatever it might be. Send it as an email. Maybe get a group of individuals, as we do so often, and bring our Sunday school class to just buy out a theater if we can. And that is certainly the case. But you said something in passing I was aware of, and that is you were actually shooting this in England during the middle of the COVID pandemic. And as I understand, the British government gave you very strict COVID protocols in order for you to shoot in those 18 separate locations.
That was right. And, if a key person like myself, the director, any of the assistant directors, cinematographer, if anybody came up with a positive test during the time of shooting from the middle of September of last year to the middle of October, it would have shut down the production. And it probably wouldn't have gotten made because people would have had to do other things. And then what happened shortly after we finished shooting in the middle of October, the British government shut down filmmaking in England. Again, it was shut down in March, opened up in August and end of August, and shut down again the end of October and didn't open again until spring. So it was very providential for us to have the ability to shoot this movie in that small window that was given us.
I just think it's incredible. Again, one of those kind of grade B miracles. Let's, if we can, talk about this idea that a lot of this comes from his autobiography, Surprised by Joy. But I understand you also got the rights from the C.S. Lewis estate to quote him and to provide lots of sources because, as always, people might say, well, how close does this hew to the actual life of C.S. Lewis? And that is another very significant element that I think we should mention about as well.
Yeah, well, thank you for mentioning that, Kerby, because, we had the stage rights. We've worked with the C.S. Lewis estate for about 20 years. We've got the rights to Screwtape Letters, Great Divorce, and The Most Reluctant Convert stage production, which allowed us to use Lewis's material, his actual material of Screwtape Letters, Great Divorce, and various pieces like the Most Reluctant Convert has primarily his memoir, Surprised by Joy, but also takes a lot from Mere Christianity, from The Problem of Pain, from many of his letters, God in the Dock. So there's a lot of sources, but we didn't have the rights to do film. So we had to go back to get those rights. And that's, usually more challenging because, the theater is pretty localized, but film could be almost global.
And so, again, just a great opportunity. Need to take a break. When we come back, we want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you do explain about C.S. Lewis. And first of all, let me encourage you, as we are going to a break, to go to the website, pointofview.net. You're going to find a couple of things. You can, first of all, click on the information about our friends there, which are at the Fellowship for Performing Arts. It's fpatheater.com, but you don't have to remember all that because we have all of that linked on the website. Then we have the home page, and in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see where you can get tickets. You can also click on the watch the trailer there, but we actually have an extra section there where it has just the trailer where you can watch it. It's a little over 2 minutes long, and there is an opportunity there to hit the share button and to put that on your Facebook page, your Twitter page, or something else. Want to try to maximize as many people as possible knowing about this film. And you've heard me say before, there are reasons to go to these faith-informing and faith-encouraging films because, after all, we want to encourage you. Number one, we want to, of course, do that. But number two, we also want to encourage you to maybe use this in an evangelistic way. But number three, we also want to send if you will, a message to Hollywood and other film producers that we want more of these kinds of films. So showing up on November 3rd or 4th is going to be really key. We'll come back, though, and talk about some of the lessons we can learn from C.S. Lewis as we continue our conversation with Max McLean. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Attorney General Merrick Garland may have tipped over a string of dominoes when he issued his memorandum concerning protesting parents at school board meetings. That is the argument Roger Kimball makes in a recent article. He says the Attorney General wants to mobilize the entire police power of the state against parents because they have suddenly woken to the wokeness haunting their schools. Parents don't like what is happening and rightfully believe that they should have a voice. They pay for the schools. The school board, in theory, works for them. Instead, the National School Board Association called them domestic terrorists and accused them of hate crimes. At this point, let's state the obvious. A true threat or act of intimidation should be dealt with by a local law enforcement official. On the other hand, parents who say they will defeat a school board member in the next election should not be conflated with physical threats or intimidation. The Attorney General wants to forge a partnership among federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement. This isn't constitutional and perhaps a conflict of interest given the fact that his son-in-law is a president of a company that sells to schools some of the controversial material parents are protesting. Roger Kimball's article details how much of this was coordinated behind the scenes, and one letter suggests that the Patriot Act should be cited as justification for dealing with these protesting parents. In case you forgot, the Patriot Act was enacted 20 years ago to protect innocent Americans from terrorists. It is not implemented to actually go after angry and frustrated parents at a school board meeting. One concerned mother talked about the domino effect. She observed that when one parent speaks out, another parent feels like it is safer for them to speak out. The sound you're hearing is the sound of dominoes falling. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, 1-800-351-1212. But certainly mark your calendar so that you can actually go and see this film. Premieres November 3rd, but also the 4th. I've noticed that there's another opportunity on November 7th, and we have all sorts of information about this on the website. And again, it is the untold story of C.S. Lewis, the most reluctant convert. Max, I might just mention you play the older C.S. Lewis. I was delighted to see that Nicholas Ralph is in that. Some of us might remember him from All Creatures Great and Small. And then you have somebody playing a boy at the age of 10. So this, first of all, has just incredible production values, and which is why I'm encouraging all of our listeners right now to go watch the trailer. I think that will hook them on wanting to go and see the film. But you did certainly put together a very significant outreach, and I think this could be very effectively used to not only encourage Christians right now here in the 21st century, but also challenge non-Christians who might have some of the same kind of questions that C.S. Lewis had at the time.
Well, I do think that those questions are ubiquitous, they're universal. Lewis was a very profound thinker, so he was looking at reality as is, and from a strictly empirical view, he came to the conclusion that either there's no God behind the universe, a God who's indifferent to good and evil, or worse, an evil God. And of course, that was supported, I suppose, by his own experience, because he lost his mother to cancer when he was 9. Had a very difficult relationship with his father growing up, especially after his mother died. and he was enlisted in the army during World War I and was in the trenches where he saw the butchery of trench warfare. And so he had this really pessimistic view of life, but it was through the relationships he had with key people like J.R.R. Tolkien, Owen Barfield, Hugo Dyson, who first talked to him about the necessity of objective reality, objective reason, the necessity of the moral law, and ultimately pointing to the God of the Bible, that there's but one God in Jesus Christ, who's his only Son. And Lewis then became the most successful, the most influential advocate of the Christian worldview of the 20th century.
Well, again, we mentioned the book Mere Christianity. That was essential and important in my own conversion. And, of course, there's a place here where he's really asking the question of, indeed, if this Jesus is a moral man would not make these kind of claims unless they were true. And, of course, that's one of the very significant parts of Mere Christianity. Screwtape Letters, of course, tells us a great deal about deception and Satan and those kinds of things. But I thought it was interesting. It was really, if some respects, the issue of later he wrote, of course, this very famous book, The Problem of Pain, because I remember him actually writing that, I was upset about all the pain and suffering in the world, and I was mad at a God I didn't believe in for allowing that. And that's when ultimately he said, I call a line crooked because I have some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it cruel and unusual and unjust? And so, in some respects, even the issue of pain, which he went through quite a bit, and your film obviously gets into that, was something that was also useful to actually bring him to a point of looking seriously at the Bible. And I think it illustrates again how sometimes when people say, how could there be a good God or an all-powerful God because we have evil in the world? Yet, nevertheless, it was that very issue, along with a number of others, that caused him to be serious about his conversion, and I think can be used today to reach out to others asking those same questions.
I think that's so true. He famously said in The Problem of Pain that Christianity creates rather than solves the problem of pain, because pain would be no problem unless, along with our daily experience of suffering, we receive good assurance that ultimate reality is righteous and loving. Because if ultimate reality is unrighteous and unloving, then there's no problem with suffering, because it's merely the natural result of an arbitrary universe. And so he comes to the conclusion either the crude beginnings of life on this planet were dropped by a fuller, more perfect life, or it all begins with the idiocy of the universe. And so that's where, that's when Lewis, when he comes to that conclusion, he starts saying, well, then what else is there? Because rock bottom reality had to be intelligent. And then later on, he realized that rock bottom reality had to be good. And so that is that was the starting point that led him towards, in a very thoughtful, very profound way, that I think will lead other people to the same conclusion.
I might also mention, of course, he's best known for the Chronicle of Narnia series, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Aslan, and all of the rest. So for individuals that have read any of the C.S. Lewis books, or read some of those books to their children, or just even somewhat familiar with him, this is going to be a delightful film, but also fill in some gaps that you might not necessarily know about this great writer, who also is one of the great apologists of the 20th century. But let's talk about what we want people to do. And the first is we have a link to cslewismovie.com. You don't even have to remember that. It's on our website, pointofview.net. Upper right-hand corner, it says Get Tickets. If you know what your zip code is, you're good. I type in mine right now, and I find multiple theaters at multiple times on Wednesday, the 3rd, Thursday the 4th, and even the 7th in Sunday, in which I can go to a variety of different theaters. Obviously, since we broadcast in almost 40 different states, you're going to have to figure out where that is in your particular state and locality. But again, I know the goal here, Max, is to get people into the theaters. Many of our listeners maybe have seen one of your stage plays, but anybody who has access to a theater will be able to watch this, right?
Yeah, that's so true because, in a normal year, we can get 75,000 people to see our tours around the country. In one day, we'll get 75 to 100,000 people see this movie and really make an impact for the Lord.
One of the other things that people can do is they can actually sign up for updates, because I would encourage people, first of all, to consider supporting the Fellowship for Performing Arts. You didn't ask me to do that, but I have supported you, and so I wouldn't ask anybody else to do something I haven't done, and I have friends that have been very significant supporters of FPA, so they can do that. And also, if they wanted to know more information, that would be the case. On the left-hand side, there's some trailers, a gallery, resources, a number of other things. So if you maybe as a church wanted to put up a poster, wanted to use a web banner, there's a whole discussion guide, which I think you could use. This could be something that could be very effective in your small group, in your Sunday school class, or in your church. So take the time to click around on cslewismovie.com, because you're going to find some great resources. And I think this is not just a one-off movie. This could be the beginning of an ongoing discussion about some of the great ideas that C.S. Lewis brings up in the movie, which even at our own group, Pro Ministries, we've got multiple articles about C.S. Lewis. There's just lots of places where people can take this conversation on into the future, don't you think?
Yeah, and in fact, at cslewismovie.com, we commissioned Dr. Devin Brown, professor of English at Asbury Seminary, who's a foremost Lewis biographer and scholar, to complete a discussion guide. He watched the movie 5 times and then wrote a discussion guide for the kind of conversations that you were suggesting, and that is available at cslewismovie.com under resources.
It's 12 pages. It's easy to print out, so I would encourage you to get there. Very well done. Devin Brown put that together, various parts of the movie that you can break out, but then discussion areas, how to look deeper, and all of the rest. So go to any of the ministries that we have highlighted over the years that have talked about C.S. Lewis, but start first at cslewismovie.com. Get that discussion guide. But most importantly, that's on the left-hand side. Go to the right-hand side and get tickets. We want to get as many seats filled as possible. And so again, Wednesday, November 3rd, Thursday, November 4th, and I suspect most of you live in an area where they're going to also maybe provide it on Sunday, November 7th, and then some others might develop because of the attendance. So, Max, thank you for all that you do there at the Fellowship, but thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View to talk about the most reluctant convert, the untold story of C.S. Lewis.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into some issues in the news, and I might just give you an overview. And next hour, we're going to be talking with Perry Brown in studio. We'll be talking about his book with you, The Promise of God's Presence. We'll also be talking with an individual running for the Texas governor race, Don Huffines. We'll be talking about some of these critical issues that not only affect the state of Texas, but nationwide. Lots to cover. We'll do that right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in about a half an hour. We're going to have a first guest in studio, then a second guest in studio. So while we have just a bit of a break between these interviews, did want to cover a couple of issues in the news, and one of those comes from Ben Shapiro. His new book of The Authoritarian Moment just come out. I ordered a copy. We might get him on the program. He's so busy, I don't know if that would happen, but nevertheless, I have posted his piece today, which is entitled "Punishing Achievement is Punishing Everyone." And it illustrates, in one way, something I'm going to get into in a little more detail, where our friends at the Wall Street Journal have talked about fly-by-night taxation. I'll get to that in just a minute. But the first article, which you can read in its entirety, is where Ben Shapiro says, this week, Democrats settled on an area of apparent commonality: the desire to eat the rich. Okay, we knew that. According to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, Senator Wyden and the Senate Finance Committee will impose a tax on unrealized gains on liquid assets held by extremely wealthy individuals, billionaires. Now, he points out that while Janet Yellen, who is Secretary Yellen, refused to call this a wealth tax, as I pointed out the other day, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, not getting the memo, I guess, went on and said, no, we'll probably have a wealth tax. So there's the wealth tax. So whatever the case is, the point he makes in this, and it would have been a great addition to his book, but of course this came out after the book was published, is it's a favorite talking point of Marxists around the world. It's also a favorite talking point of people like Senator Elizabeth Warren, who proposed a 2% wealth tax on all families with assets over $500 million, 6% on assets over $1 billion, on and on and on, because they, of course, focus on the rich, their definition of the rich. Now, you go a little further down in the article, Ben Shapiro gives us some history, and I think it's worth mentioning. Wealth taxes have been tried in a variety of countries, he says, and they have always failed. They've regularly failed, he says. When France created a wealth tax, 42,000 millionaires left the country. That's a good way to clear out all the millionaires, and at that point, French President Emmanuel Macron eventually killed it. From 1990 onward, 9 out of the 12 European countries that had a wealth tax followed his lead and killed their wealth taxes. So it's been tried before, not terribly successfully. And so the point of the punishment, he said, is they're wanting to actually tax dollars that simply do not exist. As I tried to explain over the last couple of days, sometimes this gets a little bit esoteric, a little bit arcane, and you're going, well, okay, unrealized capital gains. In other words, the bottom line is you buy stock, it goes up, you have to pay on the fact it went up, even though you didn't sell it. Because, stock sometimes goes up, sometimes goes down. Matter of fact, lots of times it does go down. And, of course, do you get a refund if it goes down? And, of course, there are just all sorts of problems, which we've talked about before. But it is, I think, illustrative of the fact that he says, even though the focus is always on the rich, he says the same thing I said just the other day, but I'll just read his point because I think he says it in a very eloquent way. What begins as a small tax on an upper crust doesn't stay that way. The original income tax contemplated in the United States was 1% applied to the lowest tax bracket and 7% on those making $500,000 or more. Today, the top marginal tax rate is 37%. Income above 86% is taxed at 24%. Eventually, the agenda becomes clear. Going after all earners, not merely those at the top. When achievement is punished, there are no income barriers. So one of the reasons why we have suggested that if you have not had the opportunity until now to let your member of Congress know what you think of what is called the Build Back Better Act, we have a take action item on the website, pointofview.net. And of course, we have some arguments as to why we think this. So what was at one time a $3.5 trillion boondoggle now has been pared down to a little less than $2 trillion, supposedly. We'll see. But we give you all sorts of reasons in there why we think that it deserves to just simply be left on the table and not voted out. But we'll see where that goes. But it brings me to another piece, which I did not post, although you can certainly find it by going to the Wall Street Journal. This comes from the editors of the Wall Street Journal, in which they call this fly-by-night taxation. They say there's never been anything like this. And for those of you that are younger listeners, this is true. Never been anything like this before. Democrats are writing tax policy for a $22 trillion economy on the fly, floating new tax increases willy-nilly with little thought to the consequences and no time for public debate. The editors say one day it's an increase in tax rates on corporations and the affluent. But wait, that doesn't have the votes. How about a carbon tax? No, that won't fly either. Hey, there goes Jeff Bezos. Let's tax him and 699 other billionaires. It polls well. Everybody hates billionaires. Oh, but that may be unconstitutional. Well, we still need money. So let's try a 15% corporate minimum tax, though to be sure to exempt investments in green energy and other pet progressive ideas. So it will be a minimum tax on some companies, but not on others. By the way, that'd be unconstitutional as well, probably. Then goes on to say, and don't forget to cut taxes for some of the rich by restoring the state and local tax deduction, though only for 2 years, but we do need those votes from New York and New Jersey. And so the editors finally, after going through a little bit more of these statements in which they're having a little bit of fun, say, what a spectacle. The editors of the Wall Street Journal say, for a century, Democrats have been the party of higher taxes, but at least they paid some attention to the policy merits. Tax writers like Dan Rostenkowski or Lloyd Benson, Rostenkowski out of Illinois, Benson out of Texas, these were Democrats, were serious people. This crowd has no clue, they say, about the consequences of their proposals, what the consequences will be, and they really don't much care. At least that's what they say. When they say, for example, take Senator Finance Chairman Ron Wyden, he's from Oregon, proposal for wealthy tax on billionaires. He finally released the details late Tuesday, and they're worse even than advertised. For example, currently assets are taxed only when they are sold and capital gains are realized. But Democrats, of course, want to tax the unrealized gains of billionaires, and as a result, that is, of course, difficult, maybe even unconstitutional, obviously very impractical, but it goes on, and I did not know this till I read this piece. They also want to make this tax retroactive. So Jeff Bezos, for example, would have to calculate his unrealized gains from the date of his initial investment to the present. He would then have 5 years to pay this initial wealth tax bill, which in the Amazon founders case would run into the tens of billions of dollars. Then they go on and point out, well, you know what's going to happen, because what happened when we had a wealth tax in France and in these other countries? Well, they left the country. Oh, well, they thought that one through, too. Ron Wyden's piece then says, faced with such punitive tax, many billionaires might choose to move abroad and give up their citizenship. But Ron Wyden has also won't let them go freely. Under current law, a U.S. citizen who renounces his citizenship is required to pay the unrealized gain on his property as if it were sold on the date of renunciation, but payment of the tax can be deferred until the time the asset is sold, although interest on the taxes owed would accrue until the sale. But the proposal by Ron Wyden would end the deferral so that the former citizen would owe the tax immediately. This amounts to a forcible sale of assets so that government can confiscate a large part of it. It's a way of making it so painful to leave the U.S. that billionaires would have to stay. The word for countries that do this sort of thing is authoritarian, which, of course, is the title of the book I mentioned just a minute ago by Ben Shapiro. As they go on to say, this is rotten tax policy you get when a party is scrambling and desperate to pass legislation that is increasingly unpopular as more and more Americans discover what's in it. The familiar tax increases that people understand are proving to be a hard sell, so Democrats are rummaging through the attic of bad socialist ideas to find some way to pretend of actually being able to pay for their multi-trillion-dollar spending blitz, the best result would be for the entire farce to collapse from its own dead weight. You've heard me say this before, and I'm hearing more and more people say it every day. These are not serious people. When you have comments being made about the supply chain and saying, well, I'm sorry you won't get your treadmill on time, these are not serious people. When you raise questions about the fact that we have at least 2 million people that are going to make their way into this country from the border, none of whom we know are vaccinated, and yet you're also requiring every American to be vaccinated, or then you are going to try to force their company to fire them. These are not serious people. And when, again, we used to at least have Democrats that knew how to write tax policy, like Dan Rostenkowski and Lloyd Benson and others, and these people are sort of making it up as it goes along, these are just not serious people. And if you have not expressed your opinion to your member of Congress, now's the time to do so. And it's on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and let me just mention one of the other articles we posted today comes from Dan Galertner, and he lives in Connecticut. We've posted one of his articles before on social media censorship. Lives in Connecticut. Next time I'm up there, I'd love to meet him because certainly writes very well. And this one is something we've mentioned before, but I think he does a very good job of reminding us of the fact that oftentimes people, when they accuse you of something, may actually be guilty of it in the first place. And And he says the left is everything they hate. He says, if there's one lesson I learned working in a startup industry, it's that people tend to assume everyone else will behave the way they behave. This is a revealing education in human behavior. He says, for example, someone who accuses everyone of cheating is likely to be a cheat. Someone who tends to be trusting is likely to be trustworthy. That is a lesson I think some of us that tend to be very trusting of should make, because when people talk to me, I assume they're telling me the truth. And yet I've seen enough social statistics to know that people oftentimes exaggerate, lie, make things up. And so it's important for us to understand that. But the point he's making here is that when you hear some of these phrases, and you find yourself in a conversation about those, or for those of us that are on talking head shows and somebody says that, you might turn it back on them. And here's just a couple of his examples. Then I want to end with some encouraging things that are happening in the news. But first of all, he says, when you hear people talk about the fact that people are not paying their fair share, which is a conversation we just heard a minute ago, is it possibly because they know that there are individuals, for example, in Silicon Valley, in these mansions that actually are in some respects not paying their fair share? That's a good question. Do people that believe you can't trust people with guns say that because they can't be trusted with guns? I love this. He says, everyone has grown up around guns, learns that before he fires his first shot to make sure that even if you are sure the gun is unloaded, still treat it as if it is unloaded. If you sweep the muzzle around an unloaded gun, even in a firing range, you're out of there. I mean, that's just the way it is. And so I thought that was an interesting line. Does the left that claims that the society is irretrievably sexist because maybe they are sexist? Now, the point he's using here is to recognize that and he uses examples like Bill Clinton and Harvey Weinstein, but you could make a couple of others very easily who have oftentimes said, I support women, and we find out they've actually been very abusive in that situation, maybe even sexist or engaged in sexual harassment. And so anyway, it's kind of interesting to see how that one plays out. Another one, does the left claim that we're all racist and born racist because they themselves are racist? Okay, they may not necessarily be racist, but they have sort of a racial perspective, assuming that maybe their race is superior and others are inferior. And he says, for example, what conclusion could we ever come up with when we hear people making statements like poor kids are just as bright as white kids, or the suggestion that blacks and Hispanics don't necessarily know how to get online? Well, it turns out, interestingly enough, those are statements made by the former candidate, now current President Joe Biden. And then one more, finally, when the left accuses everyone of trying to overthrow democracy, is that not necessarily a suggestion that what the left has been trying to be doing for some time? I mentioned the other day on reading through the New York Times piece in which somebody was talking about one party is actually a threat to democracy. I was hoping that the writer was going to say it would be the Democratic Party or the left or AOC. No, it's the Republicans. And I thought, seriously, you're seeing all the things happening right now, and it's the Republican Party that do not control any of the levers of power, and they're the threat to democracy. Sure. So nothing else. I thought it was a very good piece because it reminds us that sometimes those slogans actually may cover up the fact that individuals actually have some particular attitudes that are inappropriate. But let me go immediately to a couple of things. First of all, is there a possibility that some of the reactions that are surfacing right now on the school board meetings are going to have a positive impact? And the answer is probably yes. My Viewpoints commentary today is called School Board Dominoes. And one of the mothers who actually has been speaking out about everything from critical race theory being taught in the schools to explicit sex education being taught in the schools to really trying to promote all sorts of different kinds of sexual behaviors, said really in some respects what we're starting to see is a domino effect. One parent speaks out, another parent feels like it is safer for them to speak out. And if you've not been following, this piece reminds us of the fact that Attorney General Merrick Garland may have tipped over a string of dominoes, because when he issued that memorandum, that was an attempt to, in a sense, mobilize the police power of the state against parents. And I think in some respects, a lot of parents said, wait a minute. We actually, as some people said, we pay for the schools. That's where our tax dollars go. The school board, in at least theory, works for us. We recognize that we certainly want to leave it to the educators to understand how to teach the curriculum. But when you say that there is no place for teachers to get any kind of advice from parents, and there's no place for school boards to get any advice from parents, okay, we got a problem here. And of course, the Attorney General wants to forge, as he said, a partnership among federal, state, local enforcement. And even now, the National School Board Association has sort of apologized for their original letter that started all of this, but yet the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, has not backed down. And so in some respects, we need to see that this might actually encourage people to stand up and make a difference. So I salute those parents that are willing to go to the school boards and express their opinion. And for some of them to say, I can't seem to convince them, so if they won't see the light, they're going to feel the heat. And I'm going to run for the school board, and I'm going to replace them. And that would be a good thing. One other one coming up in the future is we've seen a lot about the university cancel culture. It, again, illustrates the fact that a while back there was a very prestigious professor, Dorian Abbott, who was supposed to speak at MIT. He's a professor at the University of Chicago, undergraduate degree from Harvard, PhD in mathematics from Harvard, a recognized expert. But because he one time co-authored a piece raising questions about the current system of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and instead proposed what we need is a system of MFE, merit, fairness, and equality. That was just too much for some students. They began to criticize MIT, and so they disinvited him. But here's the good news. Professor Robert George, who we quote from quite often here at Princeton, heard about the incident and decided to sponsor the lecture. And the New York Times thought that this was so unfair that it gave coverage and press to that, so that thousands of students actually signed up to the Princeton lecture. And so what could have been another sad tale of the cancel culture on universities ended up being a fairly positive one. So I end my commentary, which is coming out next week, on 3 cheers for Professor Robert George and Princeton University. But shame on MIT for providing, again, one more example of a cancel culture out of control. So we still have some good news, and it's all the more reason for us to recognize the power of one. What you can do can make a difference, but even more so, don't ask what you can do, ask what we can do. Get some other people involved, whether it's a school board meeting, whether it's something at a university, whatever it might be, make a difference. Light a light in a dark world, and you'll make a difference. Let's take a break. Next hour, we're going to have Perry Brown with us in studio, and a little bit later, Don Huffines. Looking forward to that. But we need to take a break. You can find information that we've been talking about today on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to be talking about a number of different topics simultaneously. We'll do our best to try to separate them out, but they all kind of run together. First half hour here, we're going to really talk about some of the attributes of God, but in a way that I think is going to be very helpful to you because of this new book, With You, the promise of God's presence through the ages, and especially in terms of the omnipresence of God and the protection of God. We're going to get into that in some detail with our guest in studio, Perry Brown. And then at the bottom of the hour, we're going to have the former state senator, Don Huffines, in studio. He's running for governor of the state of Texas. We're going to talk about some of the critical issues in Texas, but of course they apply across the nation. And Perry Brown is with us in studio. He's somebody I've known, we figured at least 3 or 4, I guess 3 decades probably good enough. I've been teaching the Bible for more than 40 years. An individual that I knew actually when he was with the American Tract Society. He has been a Bible study teacher at Lake Point Church. Actually is now working with the radio ministry of Truth for Life with Alistair Begg. And I might just mention we have a link to his website. So this book, as well as some of his other books, for example, Keep Steady My Steps, 52 devotionals from the Bible, and others that are available there. A graduate of Sterling College and, of course, of Dallas Theological Seminary. Hard to believe how many years we've worked together in one way or another, but it's great to have you in this studio.
And it's wonderful to be back. Thank you, Kerby.
You can remember some of the old studios you and I used to do interviews in, and they didn't look as nice as this one, right?
Exactly.
I think it's the first time you've ever been in this studio, and it's well done, and I certainly am privileged to be here as well.
Yes.
The book has been something you've been working on for a long time, if you really want to be honest. Sometimes people say, how long do you write a book? Well, realistically, a year. In some senses, all over the last 40 or 50 years, because it really pulls together a lot of the study and teaching that you've done, isn't it?
Right. And I say that the motivation for the book was actually Christmas Eve services that I attended over the last 20 years. Because the pastor or teacher, whoever would give the homily for the Christmas Eve service or an Advent service, would always mention Matthew 1:23.
Right.
Emmanuel, Jesus Christ, God with us. And I'd walk out of those services and I'd say, that's a great slice of what God with us means, but that topic extends from Genesis clear through Revelation.
Yes.
Somebody needs to write a book on that. And after 20 years, the Lord said, that's you. So that's where that came from.
Well, again, 10 chapters, God everywhere, God beyond everywhere, here and there, then God in the Old Testament, the Gospels, the church, eternity, then God with us, protection, provision, peace. And I might just mention as we go through this, there are always times, Perry, people wanting to teach. And you've been a Bible teacher for a long time since you graduated from Dallas Seminary. And as a result, you have a way in which you can take some of these attributes of God, some of these aspects of God's character that are affecting us, and then you have a whole section where you have like a discussion guide or some other suggestions. So this is really actually made for people to teach it. But let me get into it. God is everywhere. That's a big word, omnipresence. And the reality is, I can think of many sermons that talk about God's omniscience and God's omnipotence. I can't think of too many verses or too many presentations or sermons on God's omnipresence. I can think of Psalm 139, for example.
Right.
But there aren't many, and this is why I think your book is so important and fills a very important biblical gap in something that we need to know as Christians.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, his omnipresence refers to God being at all places fully at all times. And it's not just a matter of being spatially somewhere scattered throughout the universe, but also in all time frames from eternity to eternity. So I try to cover both of those aspects in the book, and it stretched my mind when I was finally challenged to write all that down. I think it will stretch the reader's mind, too.
And what I love is, even here, I was struck by the fact that you quote from Isaac Watts. Of course, he's known for probably 800, I think, various hymns. And, of course, we sing Joy to the World, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, and all the rest. But you take us to one that talks about, and everywhere that man can be, thou, God, art present there. So you, of course, just get some great theology from these great hymns.
Right.
And one more aspect of God's omnipresence, which I think sometimes, to be honest and candid, I think we've missed some of that in our preaching in some of our churches.
Yeah, I think so. A lot of when was the last time you heard a series of sermons on the attributes of God? It's been a while for me. So we're covering a very few of them. God has so many that are wonderful to study. But this is a beginning, and as you said, it covers ones that aren't normally covered.
Let's take something else, because people might say, well, I believe in the Eastern religion. I believe God is everywhere. God is in you and me and everything else. And that brings us to chapter 2 in terms of the transcendence of God, because that's another aspect of that as well. God created the world ex nihilo, out of nothing, apart from him. And there are people today that, quite frankly, if they don't understand God's transcendence, can easily kind of fall into some of the ideas of Eastern religion, can't they?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I say in my book, just to give you an example, I'm going to reveal a personal fact to you. I'm 175, or I weigh 175. And you say, okay, that's good. But what if I said I weigh 175 inches? Then you'd say, whoa, that doesn't fit. Inches doesn't fit. When we talk about God being far away, when we talk about him being greater, we're using all the wrong metaphors to try and describe him. He is other than his creation. If the creation were to collapse and time and space were to go away, God would still exist. And often the best image that we have as God is the image that we see in the mirror in the morning. It's the other way around. Yes. We're like him, but he is not like us.
We've talked about God's omnipresence, and then, of course, God's transcendence. That separates the view of God in the Bible from, say, Eastern religions. What about God's immanence? Now, that's another one, because my Muslim friends will say, oh, yeah, I believe that Allah is transcendent. He's unknowable. He's never actually come to earth. He reveals himself through the Holy Prophet Muhammad or through the Quran. And so we have to have that intention as well if we're going to have a biblical view of God.
Exactly. In fact, we were talking with some lifelong friends a couple of weeks ago who have ministered in Niger, or Niger, as we would say, for the last 30 years, and working with Muslim tribes, so they know Islam very well. And then we were talking about the book, and my friend Steve said, you have to understand that Islam certainly understands the transcendence and holiness of God, but God is not immanent. And that's where Christianity is set apart, because God not only is transcendent and holy, but he's close by because he's come to be with us. And the wonderful part about it all is he wants to be, he desires to be with us.
And that's really back to your Christmas message, the idea that God with you, God with us. And that is really important, because in some respects we see in the book of Hebrews and other passages the idea that indeed Jesus came and suffered and lived and even faced the kind of temptations we face. So we don't have some distant high priest that has no understanding of our world. He does understand that. And so you can begin to see that although this teaches great theology, one of the things that Perry Brown is good at is devotional writing. And I mentioned his earlier book. This one would be just very easy to read in terms of a devotional. But more importantly, I also want to get some of you that are out there, maybe small group teachers and Bible teachers and even pastors, to think about whether or not you want to teach this. Need to take a break, though. If you find yourself saying, well, I'm interested in that book, we have a link to Perry Brown's website, and we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Attorney General Merrick Garland may have tipped over a string of dominoes when he issued his memorandum concerning protesting parents at school board meetings. That is the argument Roger Kimball makes in a recent article. He says the Attorney General wants to mobilize the entire police power of the state against parents because they have suddenly woken to the wokeness haunting their schools. Parents don't like what is happening and rightfully believe that they should have a voice. They pay for the schools. The school board, in theory, works for them. Instead, the National School Board Association called them domestic terrorists and accused them of hate crimes. At this point, let's state the obvious. A true threat or act of intimidation should be dealt with by a local law enforcement official. On the other hand, parents who say they will defeat a school board member in the next election should not be conflated with physical threats or intimidation. The Attorney General wants to forge a partnership among federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement. This isn't constitutional and perhaps a conflict of interest given the fact that his son-in-law is a president of a company that sells to schools some of the controversial material parents are protesting. Roger Kimball's article details how much of this was coordinated behind the scenes, and one letter suggests that the Patriot Act should be cited as justification for dealing with these protesting parents. In case you forgot, the Patriot Act was enacted 20 years ago to protect innocent Americans from terrorists. It is not implemented to actually go after angry and frustrated parents at a school board meeting. One concerned mother talked about the domino effect. She observed that when one parent speaks out, another parent feels like it is safer for them to speak out. The sound you're hearing is the sound of dominoes falling. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes in studio with me today, Perry Brown. And again, if we've gone through this quickly, first of all, you can actually go to our website, which is pointofview.net, and you can click on the button that says watch or listen, or you can simply go to the YouTube channel and watch this again or pass it on to others that might want to know about it. But also, I do encourage you to get a copy of the book. But we spent just a little bit of time talking about some of the introductory chapters that talk about the various attributes of God. But then what I love about this, because again, you majored in Old Testament, you take it to the scriptures. And chapter 4, God with us in the Old Testament. And so when we think of God with us in the Old Testament, I wasn't surprised as I was going through this to see the tabernacle and the temple, because in the Old Testament, that's where we see God, isn't it?
Right, exactly. And you think the book of Exodus in particular, and what do you think of? You think of Moses being called in the wilderness, the plagues, he and Aaron going before Pharaoh, the Passover, Mount Sinai, the Ten Commandments. But the last 40% of the book of Exodus is building the tabernacle and God's instructions for that. And in Exodus chapter 40, God's glory descends upon the temple, and you realize, oh, that's where all of this has been leading to from Exodus chapter 1, is just so that God could get back in the midst, literally, of his people. So it's a wonderful story.
And again, the whole chapter that really will take you through the Old Testament, and again, that's where your background and your teaching and strength are just outstanding. But I'm going to keep the train moving down the road here, because that then brings us to the New Testament, and you have a chapter on God with us in the Gospels. That one, I would think, is pretty easy for people to understand, understand, but you immediately not only take us through what the terms Son of Man, Son of God mean, but then you also take us to the book of Revelation, which we're going to get to in just a minute, because that helps us understand what it meant when indeed we talk about God with us, and that very famous passage that we always read at Christmas time.
You bet, exactly. And the Son of God, the Son of Man, I chose those two because Son of God is playing off of that God in the God with us name, and God with us emphasizes the Son of Man. And when you look at those two aspects of Jesus Christ, you understand much more about the immanence of God and God with us, and how he riled tempers, how he got on the bad side of those who just would not accept it, but those who understood it as well as they came to love him and trust him as Savior.
One of the other chapters is God with us, and I got to love the fact that you remember Flip Wilson. A while back, I was actually speaking, and I said, okay, those of you that have gray hair or no hair at all, you might remember Flip Wilson. What was he best known for? Well, the devil made me do it, and you actually used that to talk about some of the other things that he says, but it reminds us that the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil, which is actually 1 John 3:8.
Right.
People, I think, miss that idea. And when we talk about God with us, well, we're talking about God in us, aren't we?
Right.
Yes.
Now, we're in this age. We're in the age of the church. And
Yes.
now the wonderful reality is that not only is God near us, not only is God with us, but if we are believers in Jesus Christ, he is within us. Romans 8:29, 1 Corinthians 6:19. They can't get any more imminent and any more intimate than that. So that's what that chapter mainly focuses on, is Christ or God, Holy Spirit within us through indwelling that Jesus promised in John 14:7.
Again, I might just mention there's some really good discussion questions at the end of each one of those chapters, and I thought you had some great issues there. Of course, 1 John 1:9 and others that you might want to memorize. But then you had one on God with us in terms of eternity. Now, that takes us to the book of Revelation, to the new heavens and the new earth. We had Lee Strobel on recently talking about his book, The Case for Heaven. So we got into that conversation a little bit, but it is interesting to recognize that earth as it is right now is not ultimately our home.
Right.
There will be a new heaven, a new earth, and as us old guys like, a new body as well. And so these are some things that, again, help us understand the whole biblical picture from Genesis to Revelation.
Yes, exactly. And God will be, Revelation 21, the first 7 or 8 verses of that, God is going to be with us. And in fact, I think the Trinity is going to be with us in a way that has never occurred before, and in a way that God has desired from Genesis 1 to be with us in a way that's totally unhindered. His glory is fully revealed. The sun and the moon aren't needed anymore. It's his glory that lights the earth.
Oh, so incredible. A lot of encouragement here. Last couple of chapters, God is with us, protection, provision, and peace. And I thought that those would be good because, again, some people, after they've had great Bible teaching, then ask the question, well, so what? What does it make any difference in my life? And once you understand that God is with you, even during the difficult times, even when you pray and you see no answer, sometimes you do have to take that by faith. But that's really why this book is not only a great teaching, I think it's really kind of a great devotional that people might need at a time when they're really dealing with a question in terms of their future, a question about their medical health, a question about their prodigal kids or whatever it might be. This book would really be an encouragement to them.
You bet. And the hardships in life were not, we can't avoid them. They're going to come, and knowing that no matter how we feel, whether we're depressed, whether we're up, whether we're down, whether we're on a mountaintop or in a valley, God hasn't moved. He's still near us. He's still with us, and he desires to be with us. And he just wants us to accept that by faith and trust in his promises to move ahead, and he will move us ahead through those.
Let me just mention that we do have a link on the website. Now, of course, you can probably just go to the online sources as well, but it then has a list of the various books that you have written. And this one in particular, very inexpensive. You always produce such inexpensive books. That's really good. Maybe that comes from the days when you were the American Tract Society, but very inexpensive, and yet you could buy multiple copies of this and lead people through a small group, and you would have everything you need. It's plug and play, got various discussion questions, and so it would be a great devotional for individuals, as well as then you have selected sources if you want to really dig deeper.
Right.
And I just think I know you've put a lot of time and energy into a book that's very readable and fairly short. But before we go, I just thought, and I ask you if I could ask you this question about the fact that you are such a gifted writer and editor, and that has come through 40 years of actually studying God's Word, but also being a writer. Today, of course, you work with Alistair Begg at Truth for Life, but you've worked with a number of different ministries. We've got your bio, which is really impressive as a writer and an editor. And in some respects, what would you say to some of our listeners out here? Because once a year, we actually encourage many of our listeners that have the gift of writing to go to the Christian Writers Conference. We promote it every year. It's usually in July. We've had people come from all over the country to that event. But what would you say to some of the people out here that maybe say, I think I've got a book in me, or I've got an article I'd like to get published, or something of that nature? How is it that you've become such a gifted writer and editor? I know you're going to be humble, but you are. And anybody that knows you are.
Well, two things. First of all, I had someone ask me this a couple of years ago. They said, I think I'd like to get into writing. And I said, well, are you writing any? And he said, well, no. And I said, the simplest thing you can do, you can go online now and create your own blog for next to nothing. Go and start blogging daily. Start writing about what God is laying on your heart and develop that skill of honing and writing your work. And then if you can find a mentor, I had a great mentor and a fellow by the name of Doug Salser for 11 years.
I've known Doug as long as I've known you.
Yes. And he taught me, and he brought me along the good and the bad and the ugly and all of that process of growing. And he was a wonderful mentor, and I'm a much stronger writer today because of Doug's influence.
And I would say that you become a better writer by writing.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, you become a better musician by doing music, and you become a better actor by acting. I mean, there's a sense in which if you're not writing, you're not going to get to be a better writer. And people say, how is it you write 5 commentaries every week? I get in front of a computer, and all of a sudden my fingers start moving, and things come to mind, and ideas come to mind, and I turn some phrases around, and then sometimes after you write it, a good writer also should be a good editor.
Exactly.
And I start editing things out, oftentimes because Andrew tells me it's too long, or we need another line, or something like that. And so, again, you can learn some lessons from some of these craftsmen, and whether it's Philip Yancey or whether it's Perry Brown or whatever, these are people that have actually honed their writing skill. Let me encourage you to do the same. But also, let me encourage you to get a copy of the book. It is very easy to obtain. It's very inexpensive. With you, the promise of God's presence through the ages. And it's just been good to reconnect with you. And thank you for giving us a few minutes here today on Point of View.
Thank you so much, Kerby. And I hope folks will be encouraged to buy the book. Coming into this Christmas season, I think it could really do a lot of folks a lot of good.
Again, if you're a pastor and you're going to be talking about God with us, you've got your sermon illustrations right here.
Exactly.
So again, Perry Brown with us, and I wish we had a little more time, and maybe we'll do that again in the future with some other books. But we have, of course, the state senator, former state senator Don Huffines, in studio with us in just a minute, and so we need to take a break. But if you'd like to know more about Perry Brown or this book with you, simply go to the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We'll cover that right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. the Point of View radio talk show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
In studio now, we have Don Huffines, and he is a fifth-generation Texan. Individual that last time we talked with him, of course, was the state senator, now former state senator, graduate of the University of Texas. He and his brother, Philip, developed Huffines Communities, a generous philanthropist and individual that supported nonprofits, but also running for the governor of the state of Texas. And whether you live in Texas or not, most of the issues he is talking about, we have a link there there to some of his issues: border security, election integrity, social media censorship, critical race theory. These are the kind of things we talk about every single day. So, Senator Huffines, just great to have you in studio with us.
Oh, it's great to be here, Kerby.
I was just thinking, the last time we talked with you, you were by phone, and you were state senator then, and we were talking about election integrity. The other day, I did a commentary on the fact that there are people being prosecuted right now for voter fraud. And I remember you had dug up some things from Dallas County. Now, Dallas County is not exactly the hotbed of voter fraud, but you were finding that there were individuals even then that you had looked at that had not actually, that had voted, I should say, should not have voted illegally, some of them going all the way back to like 1980. That's 40 years ago, and you've had people illegally voting all these years, even in Dallas County. What about that?
Well, those were non-citizens. And in Texas, of course, it's illegal to register to vote if you're a non-citizen, and it's a felony to vote if you are a non-citizen. And it's just as an example of how much illegal activity occurs in our elections. And this is before, of course, the 2020 election when it's really brought to the forefront. But we know that people have really cheated in elections for many, many years. I go around saying this. I think people have cheated in elections since there's ever been an election. Probably the caveman cheated each other, It's just human nature. We haven't created any law that man doesn't break. So it's imperative that we get confidence in our elections. Right. It's the foundation of our constitutional republic. And, if you break that foundation, it's not going to go good. So whether... the most important thing to keep in mind is that as long as millions of people in Texas feel like that our elections are not fair and their votes are not being counted properly, we've got a problem, because that's voter suppression. And a lot of people think that if their votes aren't being counted, they just don't turn out to vote. They say, what's the point?
That's so true.
So we've got to have confidence.
I'm thinking one of your fellow state senators, Brian Hughes, been on the program here, and some people say, well, I don't think there was widespread fraud, and I think his line is a very good one. Well, how much fraud do you think is okay? I mean, it seems to me that what we're hearing right now is that, well, when you're trying to come up with voter integrity laws, you're trying to find a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. I think we've learned now that the problem does exist, haven't we?
Oh, we absolutely have. And my point is, whatever it takes to get people's confidence is what we need to do. And then if I'm a business guy, and when people push back on forensic audits, I've called for a forensic audit of the 2020 election.
And that's on your pace, yeah.
Yes, sir. And people push back on that. It makes me really nervous.
Yeah.
Because audits are not just about finding cheaters. A lot of good things come out of the audits, especially third-party, good, solid audits. I mean, best practices, where maybe the Secretary of Elections let things down, didn't count the votes right, or this box wasn't processed correctly. They can learn from the mistakes that are found in the audit to give everybody a lot more confidence.
Yeah.
I've got a great plan on my campaign to give us confidence.
Yes. Well, again, audits are very important. And in the business world, sometimes an audit found some kind of area of inefficiency, and that's a good thing. Let me get to another one, because border security is a big issue. We talk about this so often. There's my booklet on immigration. And there are a lot of listeners that might say, well, yeah, I can understand why you're talking about border security, because you're a border state, Texas, California, Arizona, New Mexico. But my argument, Don, has been, if we begin to see all these individuals going into the country, in a sense, every state has become a border state, hasn't it?
Amen, Kerby. Every state and really every town can be a border town. And, we've got 61% of the border of Mexico. But I like to point out the federal government's never going to secure the border. They never have, and they never will. Even when the Republicans controlled everything in Washington, with Trump as president, we still had a very porous border. Thousands of illegals were still coming into the country. I really feel like this is a premeditated attack on Texas and the United States. I've been to the border 3 times in 120 days. I was on the committee in Austin when I was in the Texas Senate for border security. Mm-hmm. So I've been up and down the river in the gunboats, and I've flown in the helicopters, and I visited with Border Patrol, and Border Patrol saying this in 12-month period, around 1.5 million unapprehended illegals will come into Texas. That's just Texas now. And they've caught illegals since the beginning of the year from 150 different countries. And this is a security risk. All of them are being smuggled in by the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world, and that's the Mexican cartels. Violence, murder, rape, human trafficking, sex trafficking. They control the international border. So we've got to get it secure. And the only way to really do that is if a courageous governor of Texas. And that's what I'm going to do when I'm governor. And I'm going to never ask permission from the federal government.
And again, we're talking with the former state senator, Don Huffines, of course, running for the governorship. And that's part of the issue. If you wait till there is some kind of action from the national government, it just may never happen. And so there seems to be, whether you look at your state or Florida, for example, I know that you've said some nice things about the governor there and Ron DeSantis and others. There just seems to me somewhere, if you're not going to do it, we have to do it. Right? Does that make sense?
It's the only chance we have. And that's why really this election is so important for the nation. It really is. I'm going to engage the entire Texas military because Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution gives the governors the opportunity to do that when they're being invaded. And we're going to use the military to secure the river and immediately deport anyone that gets across back to the other side. And we're also going to close all 25 crossings down to all inbound commercial traffic. This is strategic to make sure we put the economic pressure on Mexico to take their side of the river back from the cartels.
How big is the state of Texas? Because, you know, we have listeners in California and, of course, in Texas and Florida and all sorts of other places. But let's just take the top two. If you were to make Texas a separate country or California a separate country, both of those would be in the top 10. So we're talking about trying to deal with a state that is bigger than most countries. And it seems to me that a person that has some business experience, we saw that when we looked at the president, might do a little better than a person that's a lawyer. What about that?
Well, there's no question about that. I think Americans and Texans are tired of career politicians that just are mainly interested in their career and not solving the issues. That's the biggest difference between me and my opponent, Abbott. My opponent's a career politician, 30 years in elected office, and never signed a paycheck in his life. And while he's been doing that, I've been creating thousands of jobs. As a matter of fact, Kerby, I'm the only elected office holder in the history of the state of Texas that never took any money from the state. No pay, pension, health care, travel vouchers, reimbursements, nothing. I'm going to do the same as governor because I'm not looking for a new job. I'm doing this because the job's not getting done. I don't need a new career.
Yeah. Well, again, one of the other things I thought we might talk about, I know she had something on critical race theory. And Don, have you noticed that it does seem to me that parents during the lockdown and seeing what their kids were supposedly learning online got a little bit upset. And I'm seeing more and more of these mothers showing up at some of these school board meetings, as well as dads showing up at school board meetings saying, we're not real thrilled about some of the things being taught in the schools. What would you do about that?
Well, there's a lot the governor can do. There's a lot of things that the legislature can do. Of course, we're going to make sure, and actually the state did pass some legislation this year to try to help on that situation. But the main thing the state can do is just jerk their funding from the schools that continue to ignore the orders not to be teaching it. But this is more than just critical race theory. A critical race theory will easily morph into something else. This is a Marxist philosophy. This is about socialism, which always leads to communism. It's trying to separate us. It's trying to pit Americans against each other by any way they can. And it's brainwashing our children. Let me just point out for a second that the governor of Texas has incredible authority. And it's never been used the way I'm going to use it as a governor, because it also sets the tone for our culture, our virtues, our values. The governor appoints thousands of people to boards and commissions across the state.
Very true.
You know, one thing that the governor appoints to is all the board of regents for every university. And imagine if our universities were really run by God-fearing patriots, patriots that believed in Jesus, people that believed in the exceptionalism of America and Texas. And that was transferred all the way down through the administrations and all the way down to the teachers that are graduating with their teaching certificates.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with former state senator Don Huffines. We do have a link to his website, donhuffines.com. You can find it on our website and look at some of the issues. Those are the issues he's talking about. Really, they're the issues we talk about every single day here on Point of View. We'll come back and talk a little bit about values, talk about the media, talk about taxes. Got a lot to cover. We'll do that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. In studio with us today, former state senator Don Huffines. You mentioned values. I thought we'd talk about this. As many people might imagine, you have a whole section here on ending abortion under your Texas issues. But also, in addition to knowing that you're pro-life, you've really wanted to see if you could even get prayer back in schools. And that is something that most Republican candidates say, well, no, that horse has left the barn. There's no way we can get back to it. What about this idea?
I think it's very doable, and it's gonna. I'm very confident I can do that. And here's really why. I don't care if we lose the lawsuit. I really don't. The federal government's not going to come down and put police in every school in the state of Texas, because it's not just the schools I'm going to put it in. I'm going to put it in every classroom. And we have 1,100 school districts. In Texas is massive. We have 5.5 million people in our government school system. Children. So I really believe this was the catalyst that started the sexual revolution, that started abortion, that started the transgender movements. This is a huge issue for our culture, our values, and our virtues.
Yes, and again, if you think of the Supreme Court case Stone versus Graham, which said you can't post the 10 Commandments in a classroom in Kentucky, which I always thought was so silly because they said, the problem is that students might read the 10 Commandments, they might believe the 10 Commandments, they might act on the 10 Commandments. I think that's a good idea. But I found out the other day, those 10 Commandments are still sitting in that classroom. They never took them down. So it's one of those ones, Supreme Court has ruled, we'll now come down and take them out. And same thing, tell me we can't pray. And of course, they had a case here in Texas where they said you couldn't pray before a high school football game. You might remember that case, the Santa Fe case. And again, the argument is that, a high school football game is not a religious activity. They've never been to a Texas high school football game, have they? Because it is the case. So these are some really interesting ideas that you're talking up with. But you mentioned education. The biggest part of the budget is education. And that gets back to property tax. Now, again, I got to get you to roll your eyes. We've been having individuals tell us that now they want to actually tax millionaires by actually taxing unrealized capital gains, which means you didn't cash out your stock or you didn't sell your house, but just because it appreciated, we're going to charge you. Where do they come up with these ideas?
That is the craziest thing I could ever imagine. And being a business person, I can tell you it's a disaster, obviously. How do you tax somebody for something that doesn't exist?
Yes.
It's just ludicrous. It's almost just a comedy show, what these socialists... So socialism always leads to communism and tyranny, and that's what we're getting.
Yes.
And this will absolutely, I'm totally convinced, this and the other ideas that they've come up with to tax us is going to throw us into a huge recession.
I think so.
And the whole country is going to suffer. They want the rich people to suffer. Well, they're going to make all of us suffer.
We really did not do well when we eventually lost economists from being in the Congress, because you had Dick Armey, who was an economist from North Texas. You had Phil Gramm. He was a Democrat, then became a Republican. And we need some people. Well, theoretically, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez knows economy, but she doesn't really. So we need some people that have a business background or an economics background. But what about this idea of property tax? I know people all over the country are saying, I can't believe the amount that I'm paying for property tax in California, in Illinois, in Florida, even in Texas. Is there anything you can do?
And there absolutely is. Texas, we have some of the highest, if not the highest, property tax in the nation. We don't have an income tax, a personal income tax, but we have extremely high property tax. In some areas, in the metropolitan areas of Texas, it's a third of the mortgage. And so this is a huge burden. And Texans are tired of renting their homes from the government. And really in the United States, you never own your own real estate. Mm-hmm. All real estate in most states is all owned by the government. When I say that, it's because you rent it from the government. They've got a first lien on it with their tax lien. And we're all fed up with it. It's a bad way to fund government. I've got a great creative ideas how to get rid of it.
And I might just mention, we do have a link to your website. So people say, well, I want to see the details, because number one, if they're in the state of Texas, they might want to know more about you. But even so, I've said before, when we've had various people on talking about this, tomorrow we're going to talk about one of the constitutional amendments having to do with religious liberty. You might want to take those same ideas and apply them to your state. But one of the other ones that I noticed you posted is on the issue of social media censorship. Now, I did see the governor in the state of Florida suggest that maybe there's something that a governor can do about that. Is there a possibility a governor in the state of Texas or in other states could do something about this censorship issue?
Oh, we can. Absolutely. The governor's got incredible authority, like I said earlier, about doing a lot of things. He's in charge of really all the legislation. He gets last call on every bill that comes out, and of course on the budget. And we're looking into that. I'm looking into that, exactly what to do, because it's a little touchy. You don't want to infringe upon the First Amendment. But these social media companies really are not First Amendment companies, right?
Yes.
They're just government. They're just monopolies that are protected by the government. So we're going to work on unhinging that protection.
One other question. I noticed you have some material about transportation and the power grid and a couple of other issues. First of all, we have an issue right now with supply chain, and it does seem to me that governors can deal with some of that. And some people have said, didn't you guys have kind of an Armageddon freeze that really was kind of a disaster? But it seems to me, again, that the power grid in the state of Texas, not to mention the power grid around the country, is a little bit vulnerable. Are there some things that we can and should do in that regard?
Absolutely, there is. Texas has an independent grid. Most people in the country might not realize that. Texans, we worked hard since electricity was invented, for 100 years, since the 20s, to make sure our grid was completely independent of the national grid. That's why we're not in the FERC system. We're in the ERCOT system, is an acronym we created.
Right.
And it was all independent. But our focus got off of that with our current governor for the last 8 years, and nobody's paid attention to it. So there's been a lot of mismanagement of it. We went to the green energy. They bought into the leftist green energy ideas, and we are the largest producer of wind energy almost in the world. Texas is. Well, when the wind's not blowing, we ain't got any juice. So it turned out to be a huge problem. And I'm going to work on that and fix it.
Well, we saw that with Snowmageddon, as I mentioned before. But again, there's some other issues, because before it's all through, we're going to see some supply chain issues, and maybe it's going to be hard to get food. It might be hard to get energy, might have brownouts. I think all of a sudden we've recognized that I need to pay attention to who my governor is. I've said before, Don, that a lot of people probably couldn't tell you who their county judge was. Then we had the lockdowns, and they said, wait a minute, I know who that person is right now. A lot of people couldn't tell you who was on the school board until all of a sudden all the issues that are surfaced there. So I'm encouraging people to look down the ballot, and if people wanted to know more about your campaign or to talk to you or learn some of the ideas that you have and apply them to their state, how can they contact you?
Go to donhuffines.com, and that's spelled Huffines, donhuffines.com, and you'll find everything on the website.
Well, again, we've got that link on the website. And again, thank you for kind of being our eyes and ears there in Austin and telling us a little bit about some issues of voter integrity. But I want to call on you again as we're talking about some of these other issues, because every day you're talking about the same kind of issues that people are dealing with all over the country. So wish you well in the campaign, and thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for being here, Kerby, and it's going to be a new day for Texas and Huffines administration.
Let's take a break, and when we come back tomorrow, we will have Debbie Georgiadis will be with us, and Dr. Merrill Matthews will have our weekend edition, and so there's some great material there. We'll certainly be talking about making it up as you go along in terms of taxes. We'll talk about what's going on in China. We'll talk about some of the issues of the vaccine, and even today, my Viewpoints commentary on school board dominoes. I think the Attorney General tipped over a domino, and they're starting to fall, and more parents are starting to say, I need to speak out. So if you find yourself wanting to know a little bit more about some of the guests we've had, Max McLean, Perry Brown, or of course Don Huffines, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew for his help as an engineer. I want to thank Steve for his help as a producer. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.